Youth Committee, Senate Committee meeting to order now. We've got 4 bills that we're going to be hearing on today. I did want to let everyone know that SB 88, it will be a hearing only. I want to make sure we hear from everybody, and judging by the sign-up sheet outside, we've got a lot of interest in that bill, so we're only going to do a hearing only today, and then we'll have another hearing at a later date on that bill. The first bill we'll hear today is SB 50.
The committee for hearing SB 50. This is a straightforward education bill that authorizes but does not require schools in grades 9 through 12 to provide for instruction in lifeguarding and aquatic safety. So as Senator Steele and I were working on some aquatic safety measures, we learned from the industry that there's a severe shortage of lifeguards. And lifeguards, the prime age of lifeguarding is 16 to 22. So that prime time. Now for schools that have aquatic programs and swim teams, this is a natural fit. The schools may offer, again, may, but are not required to offer lifeguarding and aquatic safety as a part of their curriculum. The bill requires that the State Board of Education accept a 1/2 unit elective credit if a student does pursue that and complete that requirement. It does not require the student to actually be certified in lifeguarding, but they can if they choose to. I think it's a straightforward bill. It has very few caveats, and I think the smartest thing to do is open it up for questions.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions from committee members?
Not a question so much as just appreciation for you bringing forward the bill. To the point that you made, the statistics around drowning around the country are very high. It is the second most common cause of death for kids ages 5 to 14 behind motor vehicle crashes. So thank you for your attention to this issue.
And I want to thank our partners in the YMCA, the American Red Cross, the U.S. Swim School Association, Stop Drowning Now. We've had tremendous partnerships as we've tried to craft legislation that makes sense for Georgia. Our goal is for every student, every young person in Georgia, every citizen in Georgia to learn to swim in a safe environment. And I'd appreciate the favorable consideration from the committee so that we can move this through and train more lifeguards for Georgia.
Any further questions? Be happy to entertain a motion.
Second.
We've got a motion to pass and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, same sign. Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next up on the agenda is SB 123. Wherever you prefer.
Good afternoon, committee, Mr. Chairman. I can't believe this whole crowd is here to hear my bills.
You're a very popular individual right now.
These are great pieces of legislation. I'm really hoping for a unanimous vote on both of them. So SB 123, and I've got a couple folks with me, Emily Yona and Michael O'Sullivan. I think they've got some comments on this bill after I present. But 123, the purpose of the bill is to ensure school districts will offer both college assessment, like the SAT and ACT, for college-bound students, and a nationally recognized career readiness assessment that can be used as a credential for students that may not be college-bound. This assessment will be offered during school hours. This levels the playing field for all students, particularly students located in rural districts who currently live and drive over an hour to take a college admissions test, or underserved students who have barriers that affect them taking a test on a Saturday. Lines 18 through 22 state the school districts will administer a college readiness assessment and a national career readiness assessment to public school students enrolled in the 11th and 12th grade. Line 23 through 24, testing will be offered during school hours. Lines 25 through 29 ensures the testing will be made available to students in the Department of Juvenile Justice. Lines 30 through 31 states that the scores will not be used part of the accountability assessment. Lines 32 through 34 allows the students to opt out of testing with a parent's request. And finally, in the committee sub, after discussion with the Georgia National Guard, we've amended the bill to provide students with the opportunity to take a military aptitude test, such as the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, and we believe more opportunity for students to succeed. And so that's really the only change that's in the committee sub that you should have in front of you. I don't know if what's that?
The LCL.
I don't have it in front of me.
I've got it here, LC 49 1292F. Should be right behind. Should be right behind the bill.
I think the lines might be off now. Bill's ready to change it.
Okay,
So, I apologize.
this one.
Okay.
That's what we got.
Yeah. So everything I said is in the bill. Just don't pay attention to the line numbers because we had to reconfigure it this afternoon. I apologize. Content's the same.
Do we have any questions? Senator
Yes.
Sims, yes,
Uh-huh.
ma'am. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, is this an attempt to reintroduce work keys that we had in statutes a few years back?
Say the question one more time.
Is this an attempt to reintroduce work keys that the legislature supposedly got rid of a few years ago?
No, I think our intent is basically to create opportunities and greater access to take these readiness assessments across the state. I don't know if a couple of my folks here with me on the bill, if they want to come up and talk about that
Yeah.
briefly.
Where would you like me?
Wherever you prefer.
Yeah, thank you, members of the committee. My name's Emily Yona here on behalf of ACT. Senator Sims, to your question, I know that Work Keys is one of the assessments that is one of the nationally recognized career readiness assessments. I don't know that it was in statute. I know that Work Ready Communities was introduced in Georgia under the Sidney Perdue administration. And my understanding is that it was never put into statute. However, that is one of the assessments that would be available. It wouldn't be the only one. But really the point of the assessments, and I can speak to the perspective of ACT, is just to create a pathway for students that aren't college bound or don't want to go to college. I know there's this idea that we should offer college admissions testing to every student, which we support, but also there's this idea, there's a whole group of students that will not necessarily go directly to college. And so we're trying to find a credential that they can then serve as a pipeline into industry as well.
So do we not offer ACT testing now?
It is not a statewide effort. So there are some individual
It's
schools.
not an effort, okay.
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So there are some districts on their own that are kind of doing this, where they'll offer the SAT or the ACT to their 11th graders or 12th graders. But it's very piecemeal. It's some school districts are having fundraisers on their own to try to raise the money to do this, or some schools. We actually have someone from APS here that can kind of talk to what they do. I know that, but it is not a statewide effort at this point.
So, if it's not an effort, why? Is there not a need for it? Do most people don't want it? Is there,
I may let Michael O'Sullivan
Well, let me
answer
hear
that.
from
I can't speak, to be honest, on why that's not. I think there is, from our perspective as a company, we encourage, ACT encourages people to take a college admissions test. The challenge they have, I'll just go ahead and say, they offer, I can speak for ACT, they offer 4 free fee waivers to any student that, is eligible that wants to come take the test. What they find is on a Saturday, they have difficulty getting there for a myriad of reasons. So part of this bill is offering it during school hours and offering it in districts. The other issue they're having is if you're in a rural area, sometimes you're driving up to 2 hours to get to a metro area to take the test. And so part of this is that effort to offer that, make it more widely accessible as well.
we hear that all the time about rural barriers, whether they're it's legit or not, but let me hear from you, Michael. Please, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Chairman.
Uh,
I'm sorry.
Senator
Love it.
Sims, you have probably
gosh.
forgotten more about education than I know.
I don't know. I'm just struggling here.
Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to the Senator for introducing this bill. So a few years ago, Georgia Can did a study on the missing opportunity that we have as a state to at least offer universal ACT or SAT examinations. This is not a new concept. In fact, more than half the states in our country either offered, and in some cases require, mandate as part of graduation that their 11th graders would offer and take this test. That is not what this bill does. This creates opportunities, pathways for a student during the school day, during class hours at their location to take it free of charge. And the benefit here, as we found, there's been numerous pieces of research, but I'll hit on a couple of them, which was the University of Virginia predicted that 24% of students who did not take the SAT would have posted a score at or above 1,000. And those effects were larger with increases for low-income students. There's another study by the University of Connecticut in a report, ACT for All, the effects of mandatory college entrance exam, that found that for every 10 low-income students who score college ready on the ACT or SAT, there are an additional 5 low-income students who would have scored college ready but did not take the exam. And what the study noted is that this policy is in fact effective at reducing inequality with effects on college enrollment concentrated among economically disadvantaged students in poor schools. What you find is that kids who have been told all their life, you are not college ready, this is not your path in life, will take the exam and find out actually they are. Or they'll take the exam early enough to be able to make an informed decision of what they might want to do. If their senior year they have to change or buckle down or take a different pathway, it informs them to make right, accurate decisions.
You said this was free of charge. Who pays for the exam?
So the legislation does say that it's taken and administered with state funding. So this would necessitate state funding.
State funding.
State funding, yes,
And
ma'am.
how much per student?
So that depends wildly. In a lot of cases, the district or the state is able to negotiate with either the ACT or SAT to negotiate that price down. I can't recall exactly.
You know, based on our initial preliminary calculations and what we've talked to the state about, and there would be a state funding component. Just to be clear, though, the bill states that if, the bill is not, it's a trigger bill, so it wouldn't be, enacted until there's state funding for it. Based on ACT's calculations on what we would charge, it's around a $5 million cost to the state. That's a maximum if every state took one of these assessments. However, either college readiness or the workforce credential. However, based on what we know, that's probably a very large number compared to what it would actually cost.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any further questions? Senator Brass?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my question. I'm number 2. I think my question is going to be for 2 at the podium. So we got this language specifically says state funding for a nationally recognized career and college readiness assessment at an assessment leading to a nationally recognized workforce credential to public school students enrolled in grades 11 and 12. How many different, is ACT and SAT the only 2 out there? Are there more?
I can speak. Those are the only 2 college readiness assessments for workforce credential. I know that ACT has one. My understanding is College Board has one as well. Now, I'm not sure how many more there are, to be completely transparent. My understanding, and the states that have done this, and so 17 states have done this kind of combination of both. And my understanding is it's a procurement process normal, and it would go to the districts. So at that point, the district would open up an RFP process and then decide who they wanted to partner with usually. So to Michael's point, they could get that contract fair
But
pricing.
there's only 2? that fit this criteria?
That fit the college assessments. And that's all that, like I said, that's all nationally recognized, that it's really just the SAT and the ACT are, from our understanding, the only two.
Okay. And then further question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. So where do y'all envision in the budget, state funding, do y'all have a thought on where that would come from? Are we going, I mean, is that going to come out of QBE? Is it going to come out of just general fund?
So, as you might know, the state of Georgia does provide state funding as an allocation for the PSAT. So that is a state budget funded, essentially, practice exam to get students prepared for the SAT. And the fact that we provide state funding for the practice and not necessarily the one that has an impact on their college admission or college admission decision is a weak point in our law. So yeah, it would be funded the same manner as the current PSAT that's offered to all 10th graders.
Okay, and one last follow-up.
Absolutely.
I promise. What about ASVAB? I mean, you had mentioned taking this early on to kind of see if college is for you or not. I mean, to me, ASVAB would fall in that category as well.
Yes, so that's why we had started with just college readiness and career assessment, and in conversations, ASVAB has been added to the sub. I know Joe Ferrero is here from the National Guard, and he's here to speak to that, but
Okay.
really we saw that as just, we wanted to make sure that this offers every opportunity for students.
So that was the change in the sub.
That is the
was
change.
not
That's the only
discussed.
change should be in the sub, is to add, basically ASVAB, but they, I know we didn't want to name a specific test, so it says military testing.
We're just going to name 3. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Setzler.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question really centered on the ASVAB, and we as a nation are struggling to meet our recruiting goals, and I do think we do a pretty good job of encouraging kids to think college. I don't know that we do a very good job of encouraging kids to think getting muddy and crawling under wire and doing the hard things of being in the military. But I would just speaking broadly, I do share a concern that if we're mandating something that functionally is 2 testing companies, I mean, not exclusively, but functionally is take the SAT, ACT. It would seem to me that the default ought to be the ASVAB, that you take the ASVAB, and if you take the SAT or ACT, then you get away from the ASVAB requirement. But I just, it was it just seems like there's or if a kid wants to take a vocationally relevant test, then that becomes the branch they take. But if we're going to mandate something, I just don't know that mandating tests that are centric to 2 testing companies in statute as kind of the default. It seems a little bit. I mean, if there were 6 or 10 or whatever, just thinking out loud. I mean, to me, if we're as a committee, I'm just saying this parenthetically, but if we're going to default to something, wouldn't we default to a test that's in furtherance to national service? And then you take the vocational test, you don't have to take the ASVAB. You take the SAT or ACT, you don't have to take the ASVAB. It becomes very much an option for many kids, but is the default going to not exclusively, but functionally be you take the SAT or ACT?
No.
I'm just concerned how this plays out in reality. So just
Yeah, I don't see that as necessarily the case. The ASVAB is a separate aspect, and I would love for Joe here to speak on that aspect. But no, if you take one, it does not preclude the other. I would also say, again, more than half the states in the country do offer this either as a requirement or as a optional for students to take it free of charge. And finally, these are the 2 college admissions that just about every college in the country utilizes if they have one. So thus it's aligned to to what the ongoing admissions practice is across the country.
And the only thing I'll add is that was kind of to your point, Chairman Setzler, that was kind of the point of adding them together, because I know there could have been a separate bill that did ASVAB and then this, and it was really, the goal is to offer every opportunity for students and not functionally be, that's our perspective and our intent, is to offer that, you know, and to really partner with the military services to make sure that, you know, kids are getting every opportunity. And I know we talked about how some will take a college admissions test and ASVAB and then decide, you know, to go into the military, but through college pathway too. So that was the intent, and so I hope that answers the questions. But like I said, I know that Joe from National Guard is here as well.
And to the chair, I don't know that I even have an opinion on this, but I do have thoughts. These are kind of my thoughts. It's just, I think as a committee, I think we have to wrestle with the idea of, what does this become in practice? Is this an SAT mandate? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I just, it's unpacking what we're in the shall business. You know, what are we saying shall happen? If the shall is you shall take one test that's publicly funded, and we have a list of tests, that becomes a shall and opt out. I mean, right now it would seem to me we have an opt-in system. If a kid wants to take it, they can opt in. In some cases, they get financial support to do it. It seems, just for clarity, it seems that we're taking an opt-in and making it an opt-out, which may be what we want to do. But I just want to understand what we're doing with this. I mean, is it a fair characterization to say this bill would change our opt-in system to an opt-out system? Is that?
Right now, it's entirely incumbent upon the student to manage it on their own unless they live in one of the districts that it is being offered. And the shall here is upon the district, which they shall offer it. And if it's paid, you know, assuming that the state comes through on their side, paid for free of charge to them, it's not a shall as in the student shall take this. It shall be offered for them to take it so that it increases opportunities for them.
So that a district can't say, oh, if you want to take the SAT, get in your car and drive to Macon and do it. Yeah. We got to do it here in Quitman
Basically,
County or
it's
whatever.
equal
That's right.
opportunity, and then it's up to the family to decide which pathway.
Exactly.
Senator Eccles?
So I think we finally touched on the point, or the question I was going to make to Senator Anavitarte. This bill does not mandate that students take these tests. This bill mandates that school systems make those tests available to students who choose to take them.
That's correct.
Okay.
During school hours.
During school hours.
Right.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
line 24 shall have the opportunity. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't support forcing anybody to take any tests they don't want to take.
But it just simply expands the opportunity. for
Expands access and
students.
opportunity.
Right.
That's right.
Do you have any further questions? I think I've got one other, one person that signed up to speak. It was Keelan Schooley?
Yeah.
I said that.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Corinne Schooley with Achieve Atlanta, and I'm joined by Dr. Kenya Gilliard, who's the College and Career Coordinator for Atlanta Public Schools. We've been partnering with Atlanta Public Schools to implement SAT School Day and now ACT School Day for several years, so we thought we'd just offer a few sort of the rationale, and if you have specific questions for Dr. Gilliard about how it works. So we work with the school district to help students access, afford, and earn post-secondary credentials. And one of the things we found when we started working with APS was that only about half of graduating students were taking an SAT or ACT. And to the point, yes, there are only two. Unfortunately, this is what colleges across the country require an SAT or ACT, including the University System of Georgia. So this is very important for our students who are thinking about going to college, that they take one of these tests. We worked with the school district to try to reduce some of those barriers. People mentioned fee waivers, trying to figure out a place where you can go that is somewhere feasible on a Saturday morning at 7:30 with students who don't have cars, so they're taking public transportation. We worked on that for a number of years. It was a real struggle, and so then we worked to implement SAT School Day, so students show up on a Tuesday, just like any other day. They're in familiar surroundings. They can get the free lunch at school if they want, and it's a much more sort of easier setting for the student to take the test. We went from 57% of students, graduates, having taken an SAT or ACT to now the most recent date is 96%. 96% of students have taken an SAT or ACT. And so to the point, this bill is about all of these exams. What we want to make sure is that no student passes by the opportunity to go to college because nobody told them that they were college material or they didn't know how to do it. I think one of the things, if you all took an SAT or ACT, I remember when I did, all of a sudden you start getting these brochures in the mail from colleges, and all of a sudden it just kind of changes your thinking. The same thing happens today. It's now through email. But so students start to learn about what their future could be like. So we see it as an opportunity to sort of access, to open access for students to help them understand what this post-secondary option could look like. This is funded in Atlanta Public Schools. Achieve Atlanta, as a supporter of the school district, is paying for this, but we would support, obviously, public funding so that more students across the state could have access to this. I'll have Dr. Gilliard say a few words.
Good afternoon. I'll kind of give you a practical perspective of how SAT Day came to light. So as Corinne mentioned, all those factors were wonderful for our students, but particularly we saw, like during COVID, we had several students who actually had test scores because when we reopened our schools, our students were still able to test, and many of those Saturday sites never opened. So as students were submitting applications, as they were doing scholarships, that also led to the legislature waiving the test admission requirements because there were a large number of students who did not have a score. But if we were to offer this across the board, that in a very odd situation would take away that barrier for students. But more than that, even at earlier grades, students need SAT or ACT scores or qualifying scores on work keys or readiness assessments to qualify for dual enrollment. So their scores from these assessments can also have them qualify to take dual enrollment while they're in high school, complete their work credentials, earn those technical certifications, and leave ready to go straight into the workforce to do the high demand, high wage jobs that we always talk about that are aligned with the Department of Labor. So more than anything for us, we want to just ensure that students are able to leave high school with the opportunity to go to and through college, so that when they leave and they choose whatever they want to do, it will close the opportunity gap, not just in the rural areas, but even within the city, because everyone has the same opportunity to sit for the assessment and utilize those scores. And then when the results come back, they're instructional planning reports that we get back so that we can use them with our teachers to help provide academic support. It is not an interruption of the instructional day. It actually aligns with the instruction that we have so that we know our work leads the students and prepares them for what they will need to do whenever they go beyond high school. So I would just ask from the school side, if we know that we're able to offer this opportunity, just like with PSAT, let us finish the trajectory of the course assessments that we're starting. So students are taking this practice test, but we want the end game result to know, what are you practicing for? Why practice if you're never going to play? Why practice with the PSAT if you're never going to really sit for the real test? So from that, many of our students have appreciated having it. We've seen tremendous gains in it, even with our college matriculation rates. So I would just favorably ask from the school side that consideration is given to make sure funding is there to ensure that all students have the same opportunity, because we know that everyone does not have the same partnerships we do, like with Achieve Atlanta. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Thank
Go ahead,
you.
Senator Sims.
I'm getting back to the funding. Is anybody here from DOE, the Department of Ed? Your budget?
We don't have anything in the budget for this now. The PSAT is a little over $2 million, and that's for all 10th graders to take.
So have you all discussed the budgetary impact or ramifications?
Yes.
Can you absorb this statewide if voted upon? I'm sorry.
So we're not asking DOE to absorb it at this point, Senator Sims. This would be, like I said, we're trying to work with the appropriations process to see that the additional funding go to DOE. We don't want to take away money what they have and what they need. This is hopefully with an addition to their budget. And like I said, the bill would be, we made sure that it would only be triggered upon funding as well for that reason.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hi, so are you getting a fiscal note on this? Oh, there you are.
So, yeah, so I'm going to back up real quick. So there's not an appropriation ask. I think all we're doing with this bill is opening the door for, I think, access and opportunity for students to take the test. We're not mandating for all students in Georgia to take this test. I think if, there was a mandate of such a sort, then I think the $5 million would kick in. And so, 5, whatever the number is. So I think right now all we're doing is trying to create the access in communities so students can take this test. And then if there's a cost discussion or anything like that, I think that would be a subsequent discussion during the budgetary process, or even a subsequent bill that we would go through the appropriations. But I think right now all we're doing is trying to create access in rural communities and also urban communities.
I think it's great, but it's going to cost money. And I thought that we have to provide a fiscal note to know that if it is passed, that how much it will cost. So am I right, Mr. Chairman? Somebody?
It's my understanding with them having, it wouldn't trigger until appropriations was funded, that it would be fine to move on this bill.
Okay, so if it's passed, then it'll come back?
Yeah, so if it's passed and signed by the governor, it's my understanding that the bill would not go into effect. The trigger would be once there's funding available from appropriations, then it would be in effect. The bill
Thank
would.
you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Sir.
Senator Brass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what y'all are doing in Atlanta Public Schools is awesome. That's great. And now I've got a little better understanding of the bill and what the overall goal is here. In Atlanta, y'all have got resources, you've got money that a lot of these smaller counties that we're trying to help and provide access in, they don't have. So I'm assuming some of this $5 million or whatever the number is going to go towards helping supplement them locally. Is that accurate, or is that going to just pay for the test? Is my first question. Mm-hmm. And then my second question, and I don't know if this is allowed or not, with a smaller county having local or limited resources, are you able to possibly would they be able to do all 3 tests on the same day at the same time in the same room with the same instructors? Is that allowed?
So, I'll take question number 2.
Well, I think she actually knows the answer.
All right, go ahead.
She jumped on it.
So for
you,
question
Mr.
number 2, they cannot administer all 3 assessments on the same day at the same time. They have to be done at different times, and they still have to follow the integrity of the assessment that would happen on Saturday. It's just on a different day. However, the faculty and staff are trained on how to administer the test. Both of the agencies have been very supportive in training the school. It is not a very litigious process. It's something that is easy for them to do, very similar to what we're already doing with PSAT, so it's not taxing. And then it really builds a strong college-going culture because your faculty then buys into the assessment because they have to administer it. So it's doable. It absolutely is doable.
Okay. Have we heard, or has anybody talked to a smaller county, maybe like a Meriwether County or something like that, has very limited resources?
We have, and we'll have. Yes,
What
we
counties?
have. We have. So ACT has a group of like-minded individuals and districts that talk about this and is this accessible? Because, like I said, there's 17 states that are already doing this, and we unfortunately they couldn't make it today as quickly as the meeting was.
What counties have y'all spoken
So
to?
we've had Troup County, I know Meriwether County is another one that has talked about this. There's a lot of districts that want this that haven't had the ability to provide it because, to your point, the resources aren't there. But we can get, like I said, if that's of interest, we can get you a list who's on that kind of committee, and kind of those, we made sure that there is representation, though, rurally and urban. And like I said, we actually had someone that was hoping to get here, but a teacher, but she was unable to get here from Southwest Georgia, so.
Thank you.
Griffin County. So I just really briefly wanted to introduce Joe Ferrero. I don't know that he signed up, but if in case anyone has the military question with ASVAB testing, and he tells me that, for that particular piece, the federal government does that.
Right.
And so they would come in and do that themselves. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Sussler.
Thanks, sir. I'm just trying to make this bill do what we want it to do. I think I get it now. I understand it. I think I support the policy. This being subject to state funding, I see on line 22 it says shall select and administer with state funding. Is that intended to be subject to state funding? I mean, because as I read this, it says you shall administer it. And oh, by the way, we provide you $4,000 per student per year in QBE funding, so use that funding to do this test. Is that the hook that you're assuming is going to make it subject and contingent upon state funding? And do we need to word that more clearly?
Yes,
line
so
is-
I've,
Go ahead, Mr.
yeah, so
Chairman.
I've been talking with Ledge Council. They did suggest that we clean that up a little bit, so he's going to offer an amendment here in a minute. Yeah, we're ready for the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. If the committee were so inclined, the amendment that I would recommend would be to add a section 2 to the bill, or insert at, after line 49, the following. Subsection A, this act shall become effective only if funds are specifically appropriated for the purposes of this act in an appropriations act enacted by the General Assembly. Subsection B, if funds are so appropriated, then this act shall become effective on the later of the date on which such appropriations act becomes effective, or the beginning date of the fiscal year for which such appropriations are made. That's the trigger language. If there's appropriations, then the substance of the bill would go into effect. And that would be added as a separate section to the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
To
Senator Sussler.
council's point, I guess, we're the General Assembly. We could say we're going to give you $18 per test, and here's your funding, and you've been funded. I mean, do we want to be more clear about, we're funding the direct cost of testing? Someone could say, well, wait a minute, this is, are we going to cover staff and overhead? I know this is contemplating during the school day when people are there, but I just want to be clear what funding means, and because we've sometimes given people 85 cents on the dollar, 60 cents on the dollar. I mean, do we want to specify if we cover the direct cost of tests, that satisfies it? I don't know.
The amendment language that I suggested would contemplate a specific appropriation. Whether that would be sufficient to cover the full amount anticipated, that's not specified in this amendment language. I don't know, sitting here, that you could say funds sufficient to cover the costs of. There may be a way to try and get you to where you want to be. I'd have to maybe take a little time to think about that.
I just don't want to be in a place where we're having the National Guard's getting paid, $250,000 a year to send National Guard folks to each of the schools because funding availability is okay. The ASVAB test itself is free, but we're now funding the people's time. Or if we are, we need to talk about that we want to fund the National Guard's time to send a staff sergeant out there to administer the test. I mean, in my mind, what I think's in our mind's eye is the direct testing cost, the $100 cost of the SCT or whatever it is. I just want to be clear. I don't know that I have a strong feeling either way, but I just don't want to be blurry and this becomes some thing that's we washed our hands of. So, to me, the direct cost of testing is what I would suggest, but maybe the committee has a different feel for that.
Yeah, I think my thoughts, I think we're really focused on the test.
Yeah, I would
itself.
imagine that any specifics on that or
I
triggers on
think
that
that's
would be set.
because if we're going to get into those pieces, then, I think each individual school district needs to make those decisions. As a former school board member, I think each individual school district should make some of those operational decisions of how they want to handle that, manage that in the schools. All that need to be run by their superintendent. So, I mean, I think the cost needs to be focused on the test itself,
Thank you. Any further questions?
and I'm okay with what Mr. Walker proposed.
If there are no other further questions, would like to take up the committee amendment first, if we've got a motion on that.
I'll make a motion to do pass to get us in the posture for an amendment, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
All in favor, raise your hand. Wait.
I have a motion that we pass the
Oh, yeah,
amendment.
that's right.
Gets it right.
Okay. So if, in effect, the trigger mechanism has been discussed, the amendment to LC 491292S as amended would insert language line 13, after such assessments, semicolon, to provide such administrations are contingent upon appropriations by the General Assembly, semicolon. Also then adding after line 49 the following. Subsection A, this act shall become effective only if funds are specifically appropriated for the purposes of this act in an appropriations act enacted by the General Assembly, period. Subsection B, if funds are so appropriated, comma, then this act shall become effective on the latter of, colon, paragraph 1, the date on which such appropriations act becomes effective, semicolon, or paragraph 2, the beginning date of the fiscal year for which such appropriations are made, period, section 3. And that would be the insert to align the section numbers.
Mr. Chairman, one comment. I just want to make sure the military part is not wrapped into Section 1, since that's already covered under the military and federal and all that.
In which case,
Sorry, Mr. Walker.
I would recommend that, whereas before I referred to this act becoming effective only if funds are specifically appropriated, I would change that to subsection A of this act shall become effective only if funds are specifically appropriated, since subsection A refers to the two assessments for which state funding is included in the language. So the trigger would be implicated, or would be associated only with subsection A of the statutory provision.
Let me ask council a question. If I were to make a substitute motion, or a motion for substitute amendment, or an amendment to the amendment, I guess we can do one of those, for purposes of clarifying that the funding, appropriated funding to cover the cost, direct cost of testing, meaning the test cost, not any other cost for facilities. I don't know, that's, I mean, because it's the school day, that might be an issue if it were weekend. I know it's school day. I think just to clarify the level of adequacy of what we're covering the cost of, because I think that puts a burden on the General Assembly to make sure if we're going to do this, it's adequate funding, right? It's not partial funding. How would I phrase that?
Are you referring to testing materials only, or is there a cost beyond the cost of testing materials that you would want included?
If my intention were to cover the cost of testing materials only, and if there's a different intention, I would welcome the author's words. I just want to make sure we know what we're voting on, and we're clear about that.
So, Mr. Chairman, Senator Sesser, just to be crystal clear, almost like saying it out of the movies, today we're only focused on the test.
So testing materials, is that, to the gentleman's point, is that what you would phrase as testing materials?
That would be my recommendation, yes,
Yes.
Senator, because the cost of testing could include intangibles such as staffing and other resources that would be a little more subjective and necessary.
I'm not looking to offer a hostile amendment to the gentleman's bill. I just want to be
No,
clear. Yeah. So,
So I then would recommend that the subsection A of this act shall become effective only if funds are specifically appropriated for the purposes of this act sufficient to cover the direct cost of testing materials in an appropriations act enacted by the General Assembly and such.
Mr. I would suggest that author is that if I were to offer that amendment, would that be a friendly amendment?
I think if we're only talking about the test itself, we're not getting into the business of, who's administering it and everything else. I think we're, just make sure we're on the same page here, because I don't want the amendment to,
The amendment I would offer if I were recognized for it
I'm
would
just
be.
trying to make sure we're not not, my friend here from Cobb County, but make sure we're not over litigating this simple legislation here.
I just want to make sure that the amendment I would offer is that we cover testing materials, as council said, if that's your intention. Just make that clear. This is the time to make it clear. When the governor signs it, that's not the time to make it clear.
Right. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Any further questions or comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be recognized at the chair's discretion to make the motion. I'd like to move the amendment that council read that would make this contingent upon the appropriations for testing materials.
Thank you. We've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your hand. On the amendment, yeah. This is for the amendment, yes, ma'am. Any opposed? Amendment passes. Now we'll take up the legislation, take up a vote on it. I'll entertain a motion on it. Oh, that's right, we do. Yeah, we'll take a vote we'll take a vote on the legislation, the bill as amended in committee.
It's LC 491291292S. As amended.
That's correct. Thank you. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Thank you. It passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'll keep going. Senate Bill 32, Alyssa's Law. I am working off LC 491209S, substitute. LC 491209S. Ready?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I've got a couple folks with me that may testify, Jesse Wethington and also Matthew Rollins, who's the district attorney for the Paulding Judicial Circuit. So Senate Bill 32, Alyssa's Law, is named for Alyssa Alahadef, one of 17 students that was killed 5 years ago today at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. Alyssa's Law is a bipartisan legislation. It aims to improve public safety response times to a life-threatening emergency. Versions of Alyssa's Law have passed in Florida and New Jersey with bipartisan support. The requirements contained in the bill are based on the recommendations from the Florida Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission, as well as the Texas House Committee report on the Uvalde incident. Alyssa's Law requires public schools to provide all classrooms with mobile panic alarm technology. Mobile or silent panic alarm technology is an alert system that allows for immediate contact with first responders that can be triggered discreetly, such as a wearable alarm button, those that are currently deployed in schools around the state, including this state capitol. These connect to local public safety answering points. Senate Bill 32 also requires that the Department of Administrative Services issue an RFP for one or more vendors for a statewide convenience contract the school systems can choose from to comply with the bill's provisions. DOAS must consult with the state school superintendent and the Georgia Emergency Management Agency prior to issuing the RFP. Many school districts across the state already employ systems that meet the requirements of Senate Bill 32, so this bill does not require them to re-procure a new system, to be clear. Additionally, the governor's proposed amendment, FY 23 Appropriations Act, currently before the Senate, includes more than $115 million in school safety grants, or $50,000 per campus, that could be used for the purposes of this bill, so this is not an unfunded mandate. The systems that this bill will require to be deployed will save the lives of Georgians, not just when the unthinkable happens, but for more commonplace staff or student medical emergencies, by preventing incidents from escalating, by buying precious moments for school resource officers to respond. If it is good enough to protect senators at the state capitol, we ought to provide no less to our students and teachers across the state. I do have one amendment, Mr. Chairman. I think we may have briefly talked about on line 23 after 911 calls. And that change would be changing "and" to an "or," just so it's explicitly clear, related to, if you have already a system, you're not, creating a scenario where something could change, or, any sort of, burden to local school districts. The one change in the sub from the original bill is that this does not require schools, again, to re-procure if they already have a system that meets the requirements. I'm sorry, and I said that backwards. Line 22, the "and" deals with the integration with local public safety answering points. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll take any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Be happy to entertain a motion from the committee.
I had a question. So, number 7. You mentioned that this is not an unfunded mandate. Can you explain that a little bit further? Where is it going to be in the budget?
So the $50,000 per campus, or the $115 million overall that is currently in the governor's budget that's going through the General Assembly for school security grants, for those school districts who do not have this system or a similar system already in place, that money can be used to cover the cost of this initiative technologies and implementation on school campuses and school districts across the state. So, for example, in my county, in Paulding County, this does not exist. They're currently using, in some situations, old technology, push button, panic alarm type stuff that doesn't necessarily route directly to first responders. Whereas in my other county, Polk County, that I represent, this exact same system is already in place.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
When you're prepared to take a motion, I'll make a motion.
Yeah, be happy to take a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we do pass on LC 491209S.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee.
What's the quorum on this committee? 6. 1, 2. That was just a hearing, yeah.
Now we're moving on to SB 88. That'd be fine.
Mr. Chairman, if it's all right, I'd like to bring up Tom Rollins, attorney here,
Yes, sir, Mr.
with
Senator.
child welfare attorney. And Mr. Chairman, just so that I get this thing started, I know we're pushed for time. If it be the will of the committee, I know there's some people, all these people here to testify for this bill, I know they are. And everybody's happy, but I'd
They've
like
been
to
waiting
make,
for you.
I'd like to make this a hearing if possible. That way it would give us a little more time to vet this and make sure we get the language right and make sure everything's done correctly. So we'll just turn this into a hearing on it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, no, that would be great with the amount of people that we've had show up with interest. Definitely want to hear from everyone. We had several bills that we heard today. We've got a committee meeting coming in after us at
Yeah.
4 p.m., Regulated Industries.
Right.
But we will have further hearings on this, so if we don't get to you today, we'll issue another hearing date. I'll make sure there's a little more lead time before that hearing to help with your schedules, to make sure that folks can get back down here so their voices can be heard. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'll just give you a brief overview where we're at if you get started, and I'll ask, Tom wants to say a few words for us too, so we'll make sure we're covering. This bill is intended simply to protect children. That's exactly what this bill is designed to do. And obviously, when you start saying you're going to protect children, you're going to have some people for and against different ways you want to go about doing that. Basically, anybody in loco parentis, which is that attorney term for anybody in charge of a child, up until the age of 16, we're going by the age of consent, would simply be, we're simply trying to limit the exposure that person would have on a child regarding gender. That's where it's at. You know, they're not supposed to, take it into effect or talk to that child about their gender without permission from the parent or guardian or some legal thing. And now we understand there's other issues out there that have affected us. That means that there may be some possible, I use the word, maybe some parents, molesting children that we don't know about, and a child may be afraid to talk to the school board, and the school board doesn't want to get permission back to go to the parent. So we're figuring out how to make that language work so the child is protected. That's the bottom line. That is the bottom line. And we want to protect it. We want to protect parents. We want to protect the teachers. We want to protect anybody, campers, church, wherever we're at, to protect people, to make sure that this is simply a bill that gives some protections and allows people in charge to know what is being taught to their children and the curriculums that they're dealing with. And if you don't mind, I'll let Tom go into it because I know we're pushed for time and you got a lot of folks here.
All right. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chairman Summers asked me to help craft something that would address the issue at hand. And I'm just going to read from the New York Times. The New York Times did a great article on this issue, very well-balanced article back in early February. They interviewed a bunch of parents whose children were transitioning socially to another gender at school without telling the parents. And the reporter notes, dozens of parents whose children had socially transitioned at school told the Times they felt villainized by educators who seemed to think that they, and not the parents, knew what was best for their children. They insisted that educators should not intervene without notifying parents unless there's evidence of physical abuse at home. Although some didn't want their children to transition at all, others said that they were open to it, but felt schools forced the process to move too quickly and that they couldn't raise concerns without being cut out completely or having their home labeled unsafe. So the intent of this bill is quite simple. In an age in which the number of teenage girls who are finding themselves with gender dysphoria has doubled recently, we simply want to make sure that in appropriate cases that parents know what's going on with their children and that educators and administrators are not hiding that fact except when it's appropriate. So what we need to do on the bill, I'll acknowledge, is that we need to make sure that we are putting the onus not to talk about these issues on the teacher, but not the child. We know that there may be children who are having some gender identity issues, may wonder about what's going on with them, especially as they hit puberty. And they may want to talk to someone about it. They may be rejected by their parents if they've already perhaps shown some gender identity issues at home or wanted or indicated an interest in transitioning at home. So we want children to be able to speak to a trusted adult about this. We want children to report any abuse, maltreatment, or neglect they're experiencing at home. But we need to come up with the right language to do that, and I have been speaking with some of our colleagues today in the child welfare and education community about how to do that. The other issue, I think, is just making sure that we craft a bill that is appropriate, that is constitutional, and that, really focuses on, making sure that children who are having gender dysphoria issues, to the extent possible that we have the family wrap around those issues and let the parents know what's going on and not hide that from the parents, except, of course, as I said, when to acknowledge that or to let the parents know about that might really violate the child's trust. We've worked with some of the educational leadership today. We can work with all of my friends in the child welfare area, and I think we'll come back to you with something that will be acceptable, I hope, to everyone, that really really hits the intent of this bill, which again is to really make sure that parents aren't left in the dark about a very, very significant change that their children are going through.
Mr. Chairman, you might also add, we're working with Georgia Equity Group, obviously superintendents in Georgia, Georgia Association of Educators, and then PAGE, Professional Association of Educators here. We're going to work with all these groups and deal with any kind of issues they may have or language they may have that cause them heartburn to make sure we get it right. And once again, it's the simple thing is protecting every child and keeping someone involved and just knowing where you're at. So I will yield to that, because I know you got a lot of folks. You got a little short time here.
Any questions from the committee?
I did have one question, Mr. Chairman,
Okay.
and I apologize, 11. I apologize that I missed the opening presentation. So I hope you haven't been over this. If you did, you'll let me know and I'll go back and watch.
All right.
The inclusion of caregiver.
Where are you at on this one?
In line 33.
Okay.
I'm on the sub.
Oh, by the way, we are LC 339386S. Just making
So,
sure.
a caregiver or pursuant to performance of services as a member of a staff. So does this encompass any and all caregivers? Like, are we talking about babysitters, my au pair, grandparents?
That's a good question, Senator Parent, and I'm happy to, that may be something we need to look at. So the idea is those in loco parentis, which I think is fairly well defined in the law, those who actually have some authority over a child. I don't think babysitters are what we had in mind.
It does
We
say
did
exercise
have-
and control.
Yeah, we did have private schools, for example, in mind, camps.
Things.
Right, that I understood, but the it does say exercise and control, but, for example, I have an au pair who is kind of like a third parent in some ways, right? So that person maybe would then fall in, which I don't think is what your intent.
Yeah, that's certainly not our intent,
No.
and we will do our best to, and I'll be happy to talk to you about changing that language.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then I had one comment, working off the committee sub. It's line 50 through 54. It has to deal with how the teacher is dressed. No provocative clothing to be worn. I think that's a little bit too broad. In my opinion, needs to be more specified.
Where are you at, Mr. Chairman?
50.
Line 50 through 54.
Are you saying that you're dressing that way, or are you, or you, what
I don't think anybody would want to see.
So you're questioning the fact that the dress of the instructor or the person in charge of the child?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
And that's a good observation. We
Okay.
we work with Legislative Council to try to narrow it down to based on community standards. So that's basically it's just things that would appeal to the prurient interest, obscenity, that sort of thing. But we'll certainly look at that as well.
It just seemed broad,
Don't want to be too
more
broad,
of an
certainly,
opinion.
yeah.
My opinion may be different than
Right, you don't want to have a, a teacher who's dressed nicely, and then somebody says, oh, she's provocative, or he's provocative, or whatnot, so.
Thank you. Any further questions from the committee?
One more, Mr. Chairman. I was a little, again, my prior caveat about having missed the opening, I was a little concerned that the bill itself could be broad enough to sweep in some standard sex ed classes.
Yes, so this is one issue we are currently in discussions with, for example, the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders about. We know that in the last couple of years, there's been a big focus on opt-out. And again, we're trying to thread that needle such that children are not pushed into or encouraged to do something without their parents' knowledge. But at the same time, we understand that getting all parents to opt into sex education is very difficult. So we're working with them on that, on how to repair that and improve that language.
Okay, thank you for that. May I ask one more, Mr. Chairman?
I'm sorry.
May I ask one more?
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Oh, no, I forgot what I was going to ask. Move on, and it'll come back to me in a second. Yeah.
Any further questions from the committee?
Just one, and I know that you said that you're reworking the bill and working with different organizations. I appreciate that. You've also, though, said this afternoon that predominantly you're focused on gender. There is, at least in this sub, still mention of sexual orientation as well. I just kind of wanted to understand confirmation. Is it in your rework, which we'll really talk about when we get it, is it gender or is it both gender and sexual orientation?
So again, the focus based upon all of the research we've done has really been on gender identity. Right. We understand that sometimes kind of crosses with sexuality. I think for our purposes, the real key is that children feel free to express themselves, to express their doubts, their concerns, to confide in adults. But we simply don't want, teachers and others to really dig into those issues without bringing the family along. And again, a lot of this boils down to the fact that a lot of parents are just simply concerned that an educator or camp counselor or someone would deal with this very major change in their child without telling them, and also treat them as if they were somehow unsafe as parents just because they might question it or be concerned about it or worry about it.
Follow up if I can. I think in definition, there are a lot of people, maybe even some in this room, who would disagree with the notion that the gender and the sexual orientation are kind of one and the same. So that's a topic for another day, perhaps.
Sure.
But I mean, I think in general, and then I'll be done, I think that there is such a thing as a school and home partnership. Mm-hmm. And what I would love to see when this bill comes back to us is a less cynical view of the school part of that partnership. Because it's true, like I get it, like I'm a parent too. I would hate to think that there's other adults in this world who know things about my child that I don't because my child is telling them and is not telling me. But at the same time, I realize in reality that that's probably true, right? There's some things children are never going to go to their parents for, but need a trusted adult in the larger village that they can go to. So, you know.
Senator, you have summed up our conversations that we've had about this bill quite well. Those are the issues we're trying to struggle with, and we want to come up with something that does bring the family to the table when it's appropriate to do so.
Right. I remember, if you'll indulge me, I did remember, Mr. Chairman. So it kind of is a follow-up a little bit to Senator Halpern's point. Have you considered that, in addition, and I agree with what she said, but in addition, there are going to be some homes, probably very few, but there may be some where it simply isn't safe for that child to discuss this issue. And, you know, and we did that, obviously, there's precedent in law for like a bypass in those rare instances where there is some evidence, because you would hate to thrust such major, children do need to be able to talk to trusted adults, and there may be that rare instance where it simply would not be safe
We agree.
to bring their family. And so, yeah, so we need something in there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out that language.
Yeah, well, none of the language is easy, but okay, thank you so much. Sorry about forgetting what I was gonna ask earlier.
Absolutely.
Any further questions from the committee? Seeing none, I'll start with our sign-up sheet, which it's very long, but we do want to hear from everyone. Want to try to keep it at about 2 minutes, and we'll go as far as we can today before the next committee comes in, and then, like I said, we'll make sure that we send out notification and plenty enough lead time for the next meeting as well.
Podium? You going to the podium with them?
Our first speaker on the list is Buddy Costley.
Good afternoon, and belated Happy New Year to the Senate Education Youth Committee. It's good to be back with you and work with you for some great policy for Georgia. I represent the Georgia Association of Educational Leaders, which represents about 3,000 assistant principals, district office leaders, and superintendents. Very proud to do so. Former educational leader myself. So I do want to thank Chairman Summers. We did reach out to him and basically ask his questions. We said, Mr. Chairman, would you be willing to entertain some concerns that we have about this bill? And I want to be honest, and we were honest, and I can't thank Chairman enough for, he spent generous amounts of time with me today, and I want to say thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have multiple concerns with the bill. You know, there are going to be people here that will testify on the philosophical concerns and the content of the bill. What we brought to him was some of the implementation problems that we see and our members see in the bill. And I just want to bring out a couple of them. I had them in a particular order, but I will point out that the author defines talk of a sensitive nature as any talk about two areas. One, about their gender identity, but two, if you look at line 37, it says sex education, including programs providing sex education pursuant to Code Section 20-2-143. So if a child discusses something that is in state code that we require as a state for that child to participate in, which are health programs, and we think about sex education, but we also think about health education and talk about issues of health that are related to that, STDs, all the wonderful things we have to talk to our kids about, to warn them about. So if you go to the idea of line 44, this is what scares a lot of our members. The line starts, if a child desires. I hear the author's concerned that they're worried about adults putting their own beliefs on kids. We talked about that issue in other legislation last year. I don't think any educator is going to get up and say, yeah, we want to proselytize kids to their own philosophies or whatever, religion, whatever those things. But this is not about the adult in this line. If you think about the authorship, it says if a child in our school system desires to discuss information of a sensitive nature, it means they want to talk about sex education that they're required to take, and they want to go to their teacher after school, in the hallway, et cetera, about homework. This teacher is going to wonder, am I allowed to talk to my student about a class that I taught? So we shared that, many of the mandated reporter concern, et cetera. And the final thing that I'll say is it alludes to parents must sign off for a record before a record can change. It says all parents or legal guardians. Some parents do not have custodial rights. That would not work in our opinions. We thank you for the time. I want to again thank the author for letting us express our concerns.
Interesting point, yeah. That's very complicated.
Our next speaker is Mrs. Blackwell. Wherever you prefer.
Good afternoon. And I would like to start with, I sent materials earlier to be included in you all's folders. I wanted to confirm that you all received them. Okay. I also have copies that I can distribute if that's easier.
Yeah, one more.
Thank you.
Go down this way, so- Thanks.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Sarah Hunt Blackwell, and I'm the First Amendment Policy Advocate with the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. The ACLU of Georgia enhances and defends the civil rights and liberties of all Georgians, and I'm sure we can agree that one of our most important rights is our freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment. SB 88 would chill protected speech. It is selectively vague, and it would infringe the right to equitable education in Georgia schools. Students and educators would be impacted by this bill, and those impacts will likely present in a number of harmful ways. SB 88 is a restrictive and harmful policy that violates the First Amendment. The United States Constitution protects non-intimate conversations about gender identity and sexual orientation, even in schools. And SB 88 runs afoul of that protection. SB 88 is a content-based regulation, meaning that it limits speech due to the topic, idea, or message being expressed. Extensive case law has established that content-based regulations are presumptively unconstitutional unless they serve a compelling state interest. There is not a compelling interest in limiting non-intimate sex and gender discussions in schools. If anything, rising suicide rates among LGBTQ+ teens suggest the compelling interest that educators need more resources for these students and should be having more of these conversations, not barring them altogether. Aside from limiting protected speech, SB 88 is also unconstitutionally vague for some of the reasons that have already gone forth in testimony this afternoon. The First Amendment protects students and educators' rights of free speech and equitable learning, and SB 88 infringes on these rights by censoring LGBTQ+ questions, concerns, and experiences. Discussions about the spectrum of sex and gender identity are the types of conversations that the First Amendment was intended to preserve. SB 88 would violate the First Amendment rights of thousands of Georgians, students and adults, censoring conversations that are legally and constitutionally permissible in Georgia schools. So on behalf of those thousands of Georgians, and in an effort to prevent this body from passing an unconstitutional law, I ask that this committee vote against SB 88 when it comes up for a vote. Thank you, and I now yield for questions.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing no questions, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
We are going to have to end the meeting. We're approaching 4 o'clock, and we've got another committee coming in. We will be having another hearing on this, seeing the interest in this, so we will make sure we'll get notice out to everyone and in plain enough time so you can make your schedules. Thank you so much, and with that, this committee hearing is adjourned.